I found a hidden camera behind the painting in my bedroom right after my own grandson framed me for drug trafficking and had me placed under house arrest. The world turned its back, but I quietly climbed into the attic and discovered something that would change everything. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to witness more episodes filled with drama, betrayal, and buried truth. The gravel crackled beneath the wheels of the moving truck as it pulled into the narrow driveway of the pale blue cottage nestled between two collapsing maple trees. It was late October in Vermont, and the air was thick with a scent Eleanor Briggs hadn't smelled in decades. Wet leaves, cold bark, and the melancholy perfume of change. From the passenger seat of the pickup, Eleanor sat in silence, her wrinkled hands folded tightly around a small wooden box in her lap. Her wedding ring caught the slant of afternoon sun as the truck came to a stop. She didn't flinch, but her eyes moved slow, alert. This was it. The end of something. Logan, her 28-year-old grandson, jumped out from the driver's side and swung around to her door. His shaggy auburn hair bobbed beneath a faded baseball cap. He smiled as he opened it. "Here we are, Grandma," he said, offering his arm. "Home sweet home?" Eleanor hesitated. The box in her lap, polished cherry no bigger than a loaf of bread, was heavier than it looked. Inside it, the ashes of her daughter Mary. Mary, who had died only 3 weeks earlier in a hospital bed 2 states away. Mary, her only child. "I don't need help," Eleanor said gently, but took Logan's arm anyway. The first step out of the truck was hard. The weight of her 76 years sat heavy in her hips and ankles. But it wasn't the physical pain that made her breath catch. It was the strange silence of returning to a place she'd known as a young nurse, a young mother, and now, an old woman with no one left but this boy she barely knew. The house was modest. White-framed windows, a small porch with peeling paint. To the right, an old wooden rocking chair sat motionless in the wind. The roofline sagged slightly. A wind chime tinkled half-heartedly near the door. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and dust. "Watch your step." "The floorboards near the kitchen creak like crazy," Logan said with a grin, hauling one of her bags inside. Eleanor followed slowly, each step echoing in the hollow chambers of her ribcage. She glanced around bare walls, mismatched furniture, a coffee table crowded with unopened mail, and a bottle of antacids. "This place isn't much," Logan said, his tone apologetic. "But it's quiet. You'll have your own room at the back. Bathroom's down the hall, and I put a kettle in for tea if you want." Eleanor offered a soft smile. "It's more than enough." He reached for the box, still cradled in her arms. "Want me to—" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'll take her." Logan nodded, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Of course." She walked slowly down the hallway, the carpet worn under her slippers, until she reached a small bedroom. A single window opened to the back garden where frost clung to the edges of the grass. The bed was neatly made. A lamp hummed gently in the corner. Eleanor set the box on the nightstand, adjusted it until it faced the window, and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a silver locket, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a faded photograph of Mary as a toddler, red curls missing 2 thighs bright with mischief. Eleanor stared at it for a long while, then tucked it back into her coat. Behind her, Logan's voice called out casual, "I'll start bringing in the rest of your things. Let me know if you're hungry." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the room breathe around her. There was something peaceful in the stillness, something that felt like an ending. But endings, she would soon learn, could be deceiving. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet tasks, unpacking a few boxes, hanging 1 or 2 photos on bare nails, folding sweaters into shallow drawers. Logan drifted in and out, cheerful, helpful, talking about work, just odd jobs, carpentry. Mostly the neighbors, keep to themselves in the town. Same as ever, you know, Vermont. Eleanor nodded and smiled and thanked him, but she watched more than she spoke. There was a restlessness in Logan's movement, a constant shifting of weight, tapping fingers, a phone that buzzed too often with messages he never opened in front of her. At dinner he made scrambled eggs and toast. "We'll do better tomorrow," he said sheepishly, placing the plate in front of her. "This is just fine," Eleanor replied. He ate quickly, she more slowly cutting her toast into perfect halves, then quarters, then eighths. "So, how long were you thinking of staying?" Logan asked suddenly. Eleanor paused, knife midair. "As long as you'll have me," she said quietly. Logan scratched his jaw. Of course. I mean, it's great, having you here. It's just been a while since I lived with anyone." Eleanor smiled. "I'll try not to get in your way." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then laughed. "You're not in my way, Grandma. It's good. We're family." Family. The word lingered in the air long after the dishes were washed and the lights turned low. That night, Eleanor stood by the bedroom window in her nightgown, arms crossed against the cold. Outside, the trees swayed gently under a pale moon. A fox padded across the yard, its eyes briefly catching the moonlight like 2 drops of quicksilver. She glanced toward the ceiling. From somewhere above, faint, deliberate, the sound of a creak. Then silence. She listened. Another creak. Not a settling house. Footsteps. Carefully, she opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. It was darker than she remembered. Logan had turned off all the lights. She moved toward the staircase that led to the upper level. There wasn't much up there, he'd told her earlier. Just storage. "I've got it locked up. It's a mess. Don't bother going up." The creaking came again, softer now. Then something else, a dull thud. Eleanor's breath held in her throat like glass. Her hand reached for the railing. But just as she stepped closer, Logan's voice cut through the silence from the living room. "Everything okay?" Eleanor turned sharply. He stood in the doorway, a shadow against the TV's soft glow. In his hand, a half-finished beer. "I thought I heard something," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Probably the wind," he replied too quickly. "This house is old, makes all kinds of noises." Eleanor didn't move. "I told you the attic's locked up. It's not safe. Stairs are too narrow, beams are rotting. Just leave it be, all right." She studied his face. There was no warmth in it now, just tension, control. "I see," she said. Logan smiled again, too fast, too bright. "Don't worry, Grandma. You're safe here." He turned and walked back into the living room. The sound of the TV resumed some late-night comedy show she didn't recognize. Eleanor stood there a moment longer, then turned around and slowly, deliberately shut her bedroom door behind her. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in the rocking chair by the window and listened to the creaks, the groans, the hum of something just out of reach. When the first light of dawn spilled across the garden, Eleanor rose and opened the locket again. "Mary," she whispered, "I don't think we're alone up there." And for the first time since arriving, she didn't feel like this was the end of a journey. It felt like the beginning of one. One she hadn't asked for. One she was not prepared to face. But one she would not run from. Not this time. Morning broke cold and blue over the hills of Vermont. The sharp scent of frost and pine crept through the window as Eleanor wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and settled at the small kitchen table. A single beam of sunlight stretched across the floorboards, like a finger pointing at something unseen. The silence of the house was different this morning, still and watchful. Eleanor's tea steamed in front of her untouched. Her eyes weren't on the mug, but on a stack of mail sitting at the edge of the counter. Most of it was Logan's fast food flyers, utility bills, a catalog, but one envelope caught her eye. It was addressed to her, Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, Logan Whitmore, 14, Hollow Pine Lane, Bennington, VT. The logo in the corner was unmistakable, a regional credit union. She hadn't banked there in over 2 decades. She picked it up with deliberate care, slid her finger along the sealed edge, and unfolded the contents. A monthly statement, balance details, line items, a signature at the bottom. Her signature. But she hadn't signed anything in months. Not at a bank, not anywhere that would explain this. She read it again. A personal loan. $20,000. Approved. Disbursed. Several cash withdrawals. All traced back to her. Eleanor blinked, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Morning," Logan called out, cheerful and loud, as he came in through the back door. He kicked the snow off his boots and dropped a bag of groceries on the counter. "Hope you didn't eat yet." Got you those cranberry muffins you like." She said nothing, holding the paper like it might vanish if she moved wrong. Logan glanced over. "What's that?" She lifted the envelope, her voice even. "A bank statement. Says I took out a loan." He froze just a fraction of a second. Then he was moving again, casual, smiling, cracking eggs into a pan. "Oh, that. Yeah. I had to set something up for utilities and repairs. The house was falling apart when I moved in. You must have signed it when we did all that paperwork last week. Don't you remember?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "No, I don't." He chuckled softly. "Well, you've been through a lot. The funeral, the move. It's normal to forget little things you know. Doctor even said you might have memory gaps with all the stress. I don't forget my own name on a loan." Logan turned the stove burner a notch higher. His back was still to her. "Maybe I shouldn't have done it that way," he said lightly. "But everything's in control, just trying to get us stable. You don't need to worry about money, Grandma. I've got it handled." She didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on his shoulders, the tension buried beneath the denim of his work shirt. The way his hands moved just a little too fast. Something inside her began to whisper. Not a voice exactly, a kind of instinct. The same one she'd once trusted as a nurse when a patient's vitals looked fine, but something told her otherwise. That feeling was back now, alive and crawling beneath her skin. By early afternoon, a delivery van pulled up the driveway. Eleanor watched from the front window, her knitting needles still in her lap, untouched. A man in a blue uniform stepped out, carried a small brown parcel to the front door, and rang the bell. Logan answered. "Package for Eleanor Briggs," the man said. "I'll take it," Logan replied, grabbing it quickly. "Thanks." But Eleanor had already moved toward him. "That's for me," she said quietly. Logan hesitated, the box halfway tucked under his arm. "Just medical stuff. From your last provider. I ordered it for you. You ran out of those patches, remember? I haven't used pain patches in 5 years." He smiled too wide. "Old habits die hard, huh?" She took the box from his hands without asking, carried it into the kitchen, grabbed a paring knife, slit the tape. Inside, dozens of blister packs. White pills stamped with a bold letter O. Bottles labeled oxycodone, codeine, tramadol. Her name printed neatly on every prescription label. Dozens of doses. Enough to supply a small clinic. Her breath caught in her throat. Footsteps behind her. Logan. "It's nothing," he said, shrugging. "Just a backlog. It's not even the full shipment. You're not in trouble." "I didn't order this," she said coldly. "No, I did. Under your name. It's easier. Insurance codes still work from your old license. Nobody checks. Trust me, it's all good." His tone was too calm, too practiced. Eleanor's hand curled tightly around the box edge. "Is this why you brought me here?" she asked. Logan raised both hands. Whoa. Don't go there. Come on. Your family. You needed a place. I offered one. It's not some scheme. This is just short term." Her voice cut like a scalpel. "Then why is my name on a controlled substance shipment?" He didn't answer. Outside wind rattled the porch. Inside silence descended like smoke. Eleanor stepped back. "You'll send it back." He looked amused. "It's already been logged. Destroying it would raise red flags. You're overreacting. I will not let you use me." He moved forward just slightly. His smile had vanished. "You don't get to decide that." That night she locked her door, pushed a chair under the knob, sat by the window again and waited for sleep that never came. At 10:22 p.m. there was a knock at the door. She didn't answer. A pause. Then Logan's voice, calm, friendly, chilling. "I didn't mean to upset you, Grandma. I'm trying to help. You've got to trust me." She said nothing, listened to the soft tread of his footsteps as he walked away, but she didn't move the chair. The next morning was gray, overcast. The sky hung heavy like something waiting to collapse. She dressed slowly, wore slacks, a thick sweater, and her old nurse's pin from decades ago. It wasn't about pride. It was about reminding herself who she was. At 9:35 a.m. the doorbell rang. She assumed it was another delivery. She moved to the door, but it was already open. Logan stood in the hallway, eyes wide. 2 uniformed officers were at the threshold. 1 male, 1 female, both solemn, both carrying small notepads. "Mrs. Briggs," the woman asked. "Yes," Eleanor said, steady. "We have some questions regarding multiple prescriptions and recent account activity flagged by the Vermont Department of Health and Human Services. Do you mind if we come in?" Logan stepped forward. There's been a mix-up. My grandma's been unwell. She doesn't understand all the things she's signed." The officers glanced at each other. Eleanor's eyes didn't leave Logan. "Let them in." The woman stepped inside. "Do you mind answering a few questions?" "No," Eleanor said. "Please, sit down." They sat. The man opened a folder, placed several documents on the table. Signatures, prescription slips, banking authorizations. All bore her name, her handwriting, except it wasn't hers. "I didn't sign these," she said. Logan laughed softly. "Come on, Grandma, you don't remember the last month's been a blur." She turned to the officers. "I've never requested medication since I retired from nursing. I take aspirin and tea, that's all. I've never used oxycodone. I've never taken out a loan. I've never used that bank in 20 years. The male officer nodded. "We understand. That's why we're asking. Some of these forms appear inconsistent." "She's old," Logan said quickly. "She's grieving. My mom just died. She's confused." Eleanor didn't blink. "I may be grieving," she said, voice steel, "but I'm not confused. And I know when someone's lying to my face." A long silence. The officers gathered their papers. "We'll follow up shortly. Thank you for your time." As they left, Eleanor stood still, hands clasped, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Logan closed the door gently. "Well," he said, "that was uncomfortable." She turned toward him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You think you're clever." He smiled again. "I think I'm necessary. You wouldn't last a month without me." "No," she said, "I wouldn't, and now I know why." That night, Eleanor opened her suitcase and took out a small journal, leather-bound, blank except for one page at the beginning. "When you feel it, write it. When you suspect it, record it. When no one believes you, prove it. Mary Briggs, RN." She picked up a pen, wrote the date, the time, the delivery, the pills, the visit, the words he said. And then she underlined one phrase. "He said I signed it. I did not." The house was quiet again. But it wasn't the comforting quiet of home. It was the quiet before a storm. And Eleanor Briggs had just learned how to listen. They came on a Thursday, 2 officers. No lights, no sirens. Just the soft hum of a patrol car pulling up the drive, quiet as snowfall. Eleanor stood in the front window as they approached. Her hands were dry. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours in 3 nights. The ache behind her eyes had become permanent. But she stood tall, back straight, her late husband's cane resting against the wall behind her. She wouldn't need it today. The younger one, the woman, was the first to speak. "Mrs. Briggs, we're here to fit you with a monitoring device. It's a formality, but it's required while the investigation proceeds." "Investigation?" Eleanor repeated flatly, as if the word had soured in her mouth. The older officer shifted his weight. "It's just house arrest. Temporary. You're not under formal charges yet. But the state is concerned about continued activity through your name. This is precautionary." Logan appeared at her side, all eager compliance. "We understand. She'll cooperate, of course. She's not a danger to anyone." "I'll speak for myself," Eleanor said. The female officer met her eyes. A flicker passed between them. Not pity, not judgment. Something cooler, measured. "Please sit," she said. Eleanor complied. The anklet was sleek, black, and cold. The woman fitted it with quiet efficiency, explaining its function: GPS alerts, tamper detection. "You can go anywhere in the house and yard, but if you pass the perimeter, we'll be notified." When it clicked into place, it felt heavier than it should have. The door closed behind them a few minutes later. Logan locked it, then turned. "Well," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "That was fun." Eleanor didn't reply. She walked to the back room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed. She stared at her ankle. The device looked like something from a different life, a different body. She could feel it even when she wasn't looking. Her freedom now ended at the front porch. The next few days unspooled like a slow-motion fall. First the mail stopped being addressed to her. Then it stopped coming at all. Then came the knock on the window, Mrs. Halverson from across the street. Eleanor rose to wave, only to see the woman's expression freeze before she turned and walked away, lips tight. In the market delivery one morning, Eleanor found the local newspaper tucked in behind the eggs and milk. Front page, former nurse implicated in drug fraud ring. Below that, her photograph taken without consent, likely scraped from an old medical association profile, her eyes' cropped expression blank. She stared at it for a long time. Inside, Logan scrolled on his phone feed on the coffee table. Must be a slow news week, he said. Eleanor folded the paper neatly, put it in the fireplace, and watched it burn. The flames didn't flicker in her eyes. They stood still solid like everything else inside her. Logan became efficient. He brought her meals on a schedule, checked in often but not out of care. He monitored her movements, her habits. He kept doors locked, windows shut. Her phone mysteriously reset, overnight contacts lost. When she asked for a replacement charger for her old laptop, he told her he couldn't find one that fit. "You don't need to be online anyway," he said with a smirk. "You've got everything you need right here." She never raised her voice, never questioned aloud, but she watched him. Every night he disappeared into the attic. The floor creaked above her head. Sometimes she could hear drawers opening, the snap of latches, the shifting of boxes. He'd said it was unsafe, but he didn't seem worried. So Eleanor adapted. She returned to the oldest skill she knew: documentation. Nurses know the value of a record. Time, date, symptom, result. So she found an unused notebook tucked between two cookbooks in the pantry, wiped the flour from its cover, and brought it to her room. She wrote in it each night. Day 1, 9:47 p.m. Logan entered attic, carrying black duffel, returned 1:12 a.m. Day 2, 12:40 p.m. Logan receives envelope, no return address. Day 3, medication cabinet rearranged, missing 2 pill bottles. I did not touch them. Day 4, I caught him staring at the fireplace while I was cooking. Expression unreadable. I pretended not to notice. Every line was sharp, every detail deliberate. It was the only power she had left. On day 5, the knock came again. This time Eleanor didn't expect it. She opened the door and found the female officer standing there. Younger than Eleanor remembered. Maybe 30, brown eyes too sharp for her age. Officer Rebecca Miles. She introduced herself, flashing a badge. "I'll be handling your check-ins from now on." Eleanor nodded. "Come in." Rebecca stepped inside. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She moved through the house with calm precision, checking each room. When she saw the anklet, she crouched to inspect it. "No tampering, that's good," she said. Eleanor tilted her head. "Do people tamper with them?" Rebecca glanced up. "People try, the desperate ones." "I'm not desperate, I know." The moment passed quiet and brittle. Rebecca stood. "Any unusual behavior concerns?" Eleanor hesitated. "Do you record our conversations?" Rebecca's brows rose slightly. "Not unless you're under formal interview." "I see." Another pause. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the hallway where Logan was watching, silent, leaning against the frame. Rebecca followed her line of sight. "You Logan?" she asked. He smiled with perfect ease. "That's me. How's she doing?" Rebecca didn't answer. She turned back to Eleanor. "If you need anything, this is my card. You can call any time." She handed over a plain white card. Eleanor took it. Didn't look at it. Just nodded. After she left, Logan said nothing for a while. "Then she's cute." Eleanor folded the card and slipped it inside her bra. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Planning a jailbreak?" "Planning nothing." "Smart." He disappeared into the attic that night for longer than usual. Eleanor didn't write that down. Instead, she opened the notebook and turned to a blank page. Sometimes silence is a weapon, and sometimes it's a scream. MB. The next morning, the routine continued. Logan left early, said something vague about meeting a supplier. He always had an excuse now, always just out of reach. Eleanor walked the perimeter of the house 3 times, stopping once at the edge of the porch, where the GPS boundary line sat like an invisible fence. She imagined stepping over it. The alarm, the call, the officers, and what Logan would lie again. Say she was confused, say she forgot, say anything. Instead, she stepped back. Went inside. She made tea, sat at the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and wrote down everything, including the time she no longer believed he was just using her name. He was building something above her, and the walls were closing in. But she would not go quietly. Not this time. Officer Rebecca Miles returned 3 days later unannounced. Eleanor was on the porch when the cruiser rolled up, knitting on her lap and a thermos of tea beside her. She'd developed a habit lately, sitting at the edge of the boundary line as if daring herself to step over. She never did, but she wanted to. Every hour a little more. Rebecca stepped out of the car, eyes narrowed behind sunglasses. Her uniform was neat, but her hair was tied up in a loose, slightly rushed bun. She wasn't here for show. "Morning, Mrs. Briggs," she said, climbing the steps. "Eleanor," she corrected. "No need for the Mrs. I've earned the right to be first name only." Rebecca allowed a flicker of a smile. "Eleanor, then." She didn't sit right away. She stood beside the porch railing, scanning the perimeter of the yard. The house, the attic window, just barely visible behind a rust-streaked shutter. "Your grandson home." He stepped out, said he had to pick up a new padlock. Rebecca's eyes flicked back to her. "For what?" Eleanor shrugged, eyes never leaving her knitting. "Didn't say. But we've got locks on almost everything these days." Rebecca tilted her head. "How's it been since the ankle monitor?" "Like living in a very polite cage, but the view's nice." Another small silence. Rebecca sat this time. The porch groaned beneath her weight. "I've been reading your file," she said at last. "I imagine it's riveting. It says you're forgetful, that you've had several incidents of confusion, that you're emotionally unstable since your daughter's death." Eleanor kept her needles moving. "Do I strike you as unstable?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. "No, you don't." Eleanor met her eyes, then still and sharp. "Grief and confusion aren't the same thing, officer. I buried my husband with full clarity. I buried my daughter with something close to madness. But I've never once been unclear about who I am or what I'm capable of." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, eyes studying her face. "You remember dates?" Eleanor nodded. "The day you moved in here, September 14th. The first package addressed in your name, October 3rd, late morning delivery, brown box. The label said personal pharmaceuticals. I never ordered it." Rebecca nodded slowly. "The loan paperwork. September 28th. It had my signature. I didn't sign it." Another silence stretched, but this one was different, thicker, filled with a tension neither woman named aloud. Rebecca finally pulled a notepad from her coat. "Would you mind repeating those dates?" Eleanor did exact and emotionless. Rebecca wrote them all down. "Thank you," she said. "Sometimes timelines don't match. That's helpful." "You think Logan's doing something he shouldn't?" Rebecca's eyes didn't blink. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." A car pulled up at the curb Logan's truck. He stepped out, sunglasses on, whistling as he came up the walk with a hardware store bag in one hand. "Well, look who's back," he called, cheerful. "Checking in on our criminal matriarch." Rebecca stood, just making sure everything's going smoothly. Logan's smile twitched. "It is. No problems here." He glanced at Eleanor. She didn't look at him. Rebecca held her stare for a beat longer, then turned toward the stairs. "Let me know if you need anything," she said to Eleanor. "Oh, I will," Eleanor replied softly. And just before Rebecca reached the car, Eleanor added, "Locks are funny things. They make you feel safe, until you realize who's holding the key." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She waited until the house was quiet, then rose from bed and padded barefoot to the living room. The floor creaked underfoot. She avoided the boards that whined the loudest out of old habit. The same way she once moved around sleeping patients and grief-stricken families. Controlled. Intentional. In the hallway, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before. A painting. She'd walked past it 100 times, an old Vermont barn in winter done in muted oils. But tonight it seemed wrong. Too clean, too straight. She stepped closer. The frame had a hairline crack on the right. The canvas was thick, but not canvas. Plastic. She touched the bottom edge and felt a metallic click. It lifted. Inside, nestled in a carved slot behind the painting, was a small black square no bigger than a matchbox. A camera lens sat at the center. "Recording," pointed at the hallway, pointed directly at her bedroom door. Her pulse didn't spike, not yet. Instead, Eleanor reached up, gently removed the device, and cupped it in her palm. She turned it slowly. A green LED light blinked at the base, active, still warm. She didn't breathe for several seconds. Then she walked to the bathroom, lifted the lid of the laundry hamper, and slid the device deep beneath the towels. If Logan checked, he'd think it had fallen. He wouldn't panic. Yet. Back in her room, she opened her notebook. 10:49 p.m. Found hidden camera behind painting. Active. Likely part of interior surveillance. Facing my door. Unclear if others exist. Do not touch other objects until full sweep can be done. Do not confront. Wait. Watch. Record. She underlined those last 3 words. Twice. Miles away in her squad car under the cover of night, Rebecca sat with Eleanor's timeline open on her laptop. It didn't match. The loan paperwork date preceded Eleanor's move-in by nearly 2 weeks. The prescription records from the State Board of Pharmacy had 3 different physician names, none of whom worked in the state anymore. One of them had died in 2018, and there in the financial disclosures was the strangest of all 3 different checking accounts opened in Eleanor Briggs's name in under 6 months, all with slight variations of address number 14 Hollow Pine, Unit B, Apton 2, rear entrance, all signed in the same scrawling script. She looked back at Eleanor's signature from the nursing license database. Sharp, precise, legible. These were not hers. Rebecca leaned back in her seat. Something wasn't just off, it was manufactured. And it wasn't sloppy. Someone wanted Eleanor to look like a woman losing her grip on time, memory, and herself. But Rebecca had seen dementia before. She'd watched her own grandmother slip into fog and confusion. Eleanor wasn't like that. She was too clear, too focused, too deliberate. The doubt that had been whispering in Rebecca's ear became a voice now, and it was saying one word: frame. Back in the house, Eleanor placed a tea bag into hot water and stared at the hallway where the painting had once hung. It looked emptier, now exposed. She thought about all the times she'd passed by it in her robe, vulnerable, speaking to herself or Mary's ashes in the quiet of night. Watched, listened to, logged. She didn't shake, didn't scream. She simply sat down and opened her notebook. On a fresh page, she drew a rough diagram of the hallway, marked the camera, the angles, the field of view. Then at the bottom she wrote, "This house is not mine, this body is not free, but this mind they still fear." She folded the page, tore it from the book, and slid it under the dresser, taping the edge to the wood, just in case. Then she closed the notebook, clicked off the lamp, and waited for the floor above to creak. When it did, she didn't flinch, because now she was the one watching. The attic door had changed. Eleanor noticed it on a Wednesday just after noon. The light through the upstairs hallway window had shifted in that crisp Vermont way, long, clear slants that revealed imperfections like secrets. And there, just below the doorknob, was a metallic keypad, sleek, new, a lock that hadn't been there the day before. She stood there in her slippers, staring. The keyhole was gone. In its place, a panel with blinking numbers and a tiny speaker grill, digital, cold, silent, old. Her hand reached out instinctively and hovered above the pad. She didn't touch it. Instead, she turned and walked away. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed. The same question ran through her mind on loop. What's so dangerous up there that needs a code? Logan had been acting stranger lately, and that was saying something. He left the house at odd hours, sometimes twice in one night, his boots crunching gravel in the driveway just past midnight. When he returned, it was always quiet. No lights flipped on, no fridge opened, no doors shut. Just the soft, muffled thump of him walking directly upstairs and closing the attic door behind him. It was always the attic. He stopped watching TV in the living room, stopped making excuses for disappearing, and most recently he had unplugged the router. She discovered it missing one morning after trying to send an email from her old iPad. No signal, no network. She asked him over dinner. "Internet's down," she said too casually. Logan didn't even look up from his plate. Took it out. Thought we could use the quiet. All that radiation probably wasn't good for you anyway. Is that so? Peace is good for people our age. The words sat on the table between them, rotting. That night Eleanor couldn't sleep again. Her bones ached with frustration, but her mind stayed sharp, electric with tension. So she did what she used to do when a patient was in crisis, back when night shifts ran long and her instincts meant life or death. She investigated. She tiptoed through the dark house, her slippers making no sound on the worn wood. The living room smelled of old coffee and dust. The clock ticked in 3 slow beats, the rhythm off somehow. And then she noticed it, the old brick fireplace. Something about it had always bothered her. The bricks just to the left of the grate looked touched, not new, not clean, but rearranged. She knelt, ran her hands along the inner ledge, and pushed gently against a loose brick. It gave way with a soft click. Behind it, wedged tightly between soot and ash, was a worn leather notebook warped slightly from heat. She pulled it free. No name, no lock, no title. Just wait. She opened it carefully, the pages dense with handwriting. Not hers, Logan's. It was messy, angular, rushed. The first few pages were lists, cryptic references to shipments, initials, amounts, addresses. Then came sequences of numbers, bank accounts, wire transfers, each page darker than the last. Then maps, rough sketches of towns, buildings marked with X's, lines drawn like supply routes. One page folded into the back cover detailed a wire transfer of $12,400 from an account under E. Briggs Medical Trust. A stamp showed it had cleared 2 days before Eleanor moved in. She stared at the numbers until they blurred. He was laundering through her, and not just pocket change. Thousands, tens of thousands. She turned back to the pages and kept reading. Hidden behind one section was a sticky note yellowed with time, the ink almost faded. It read, "Attic code is 1208. Her heart jumped. December 8th, Mary's birthday. Of course that's the code he would use. Of course he'd weaponize even that. She pressed her palm against her chest, breathing slowly, steadily, like she'd taught patience in crisis. But then from across the room a soft glint. Something in the mirror, not her reflection, something behind it. She stood and stepped closer very slowly until she was nose to glass. The mirror was old antique, the kind you'd find in a farmhouse or a Victorian parlor. But at its top right corner, just beneath the ornate wooden carving, a pinhole lens, tiny, black, watching. She leaned in until her breath fogged the surface. Then she stepped back, blinking at her own face, her own worn, hollow, angry face. They were watching her here too. There was no part of the house that wasn't his, except maybe her mind. The next morning she said nothing. Logan returned mid-morning with 2 coffees in hand and a crooked smile. "Got your favorite," he said, handing her the cup. "Hazelnut and cinnamon." She took it, didn't sip. "Where were you?" "Hardware store. Had to pick up a new panel for the shed." "There's no shed." He paused, then chuckled. "Guess I'm thinking ahead." She watched him like a hawk watches a field mouse and pretends to nap. Back in her room, Eleanor unwrapped a tissue from her sleeve. Inside was the sticky note she'd found. She flattened it, copied the numbers into her notebook, and burned the original over the bathroom sink with a matchstick she'd stashed in her bra drawer. She flushed the ashes. Then she wrote, "He uses Mary's birthday. He locked away something important, something that will explain everything. Attic is the vault. The rest of this house is a lie." She paused, then added, "They're watching, everywhere, even the glass lies now." That night Logan slept soundly. She could hear him snoring down the hall. But she stayed awake, hand resting over her ankle monitor like a soldier checking a wound. The house was colder now. Not by temperature, but tone. The kind of cold that came from knowing something you weren't supposed to know and having nowhere to put it. Not yet, but she would. Soon. She'd find a way to climb the attic, to unlock what he thought was sealed forever. And when she did, the house would no longer be his. It would be hers, theirs, Mary's. And the silence that had hung over the roof since the day she arrived would finally be broken, not by words, but by the cracking sound of truth forcing its way out, just like a lock snapping under pressure. The morning Logan left the house changed. He kissed her forehead, tossed his duffel bag into the truck, and said he'd be gone for 2 nights max. "Client in New Hampshire," he muttered. "Contracting stuff. I'll be back late Friday." Eleanor nodded, her face a careful mask. She waved as he drove off, then stood by the window until the tail lights vanished beyond the bend in the road. She didn't move for several seconds after. Then she locked the door behind her, not for safety. For time. She had waited weeks for this moment, and now the house was hers. Eleanor had always believed in preparation. As a nurse, she never began a shift without reviewing every chart twice, checking every drawer for stocked supplies, every monitor for signs of failure. And so for the past 3 nights, she'd practiced each step from her room to the attic door, each board, to avoid each sound to memorize. And now her hands shook as she opened Logan's notebook again, the one she had hidden in the lining of her winter coat. She flipped to the sketch he'd made of the attic keypad mechanism, a rough diagram note scribbled along the margins. He had been arrogant enough to leave himself breadcrumbs. She memorized the code. 1208, Mary's birthday. She stood before the door, her pulse loud in her ears. The keypad glowed dim blue as she hovered her fingers over it. She pressed 1, 2, 3, 4. A faint click. The lock disengaged. She didn't breathe as she turned the handle and pushed. The door opened with a soft sigh. The attic stairs yawned upward, narrow and steep. The scent of dust and metal drifted down like a warning. Each step creaked, but she moved slowly, keeping her weight on the edges where the wood was strongest. At the top she reached the threshold, then froze. The attic was not a storage space. It was a command center. Fluorescent lights glowed overhead. A long workbench spanned the back wall, cluttered with vials, labels, pill bottles, some sealed, others half-filled. A printer hummed quietly in the corner, churning out what looked like prescription forms. On metal shelves were plastic storage bins, all color-coded and labeled in Logan's handwriting. West Route, NH, RX blanks, DC, mid-range, Oxy, bulk. Eleanor moved through the space with quiet precision. There were dozens of sealed bags filled with tablets, bottles with forged pharmacy stickers, rubber bands wrapped around stacks of forged insurance cards. And then she saw it. A large black duffel bag, half-zipped, sitting in the corner beneath the smallest attic window. She knelt, unzipped it. Inside, prepaid debit cards, burner phones and SIM cards, dozens of them color-coded by what looked like state abbreviations. There were at least 2 passports, all fake, and a bundle of cash thick enough to buy a car in full. Her stomach twisted, but her hands kept working. This wasn't petty fraud. This was organized, sustained, industrial. She moved to the desk and powered on the laptop. It wasn't password protected. Of course it wasn't, because he thought he was untouchable. The desktop was cluttered with folders, dates, ledgers, contacts. One folder was labeled EB. She opened it. Medical licenses, scans of her old ID, forged documents with her name on oxycodone shipments, photos of her signature lifted from old nursing contracts and layered onto bank forms. She stared, ice settling in her chest. He had built the entire operation under her name. She wasn't just cover. She was the foundation. Eleanor pulled a USB stick from her pocket. It had belonged to her husband. He used it to store old jazz tracks and scanned recipes. Now it would carry something far more dangerous. She began transferring everything, folder by folder. She moved quickly, hands steady, a nurse's hands. Halfway through the download, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She froze. The screen lit up. Logan, 1 missed call. She held her breath. Then it rang again. She answered with shaking fingers. His voice came through tense, too calm. Hey, change of plans. Client canceled. I'm heading back tonight. I'll be there in an hour or 2. She said nothing. You okay? Still silence. Grandma? She forced a breath. Yes, fine. Everything's fine. Yes. He paused. Then said too slowly, good. Don't wait up. The line went dead. Eleanor stood in that attic, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. She checked the transfer, still going, 72%, then 84%. When it hit 100%, she yanked the USB out, stuffed it into her bra, and powered down the machine. She took pictures, every bin label, every burner phone, every pill bag, every passport. Then she zipped the duffel shut, rearranged the notebooks on the desk as they were. Before she turned to leave, she looked around once more. The room didn't feel like part of a home anymore. It felt like a crime scene waiting to be cordoned off in yellow tape. She closed the attic door behind her and locked it again from the inside. As she descended the stairs, heart thudding in her ears, she whispered to herself, "You don't own me, not anymore." She was back in her room by the time Logan's truck pulled into the driveway. She watched him from her bedroom window, his stride faster, tighter, his eyes scanning the house as he climbed the steps. Something in him knew. She could see it in the way he hesitated before unlocking the front door, the way he exhaled before stepping inside. She sat on her bed, knitting in her lap, thermos of tea beside her, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just seen the worst of him and stolen the only thing that could destroy him. Logan's truck rolled into the driveway at 10:17 p.m. Eleanor had already set the house into evening mode, her robe on the hallway lights dimmed, TV volume low. She sat on the couch with an Afghan over her knees, pretending to be half dozing, but her eyes were sharp behind half-closed lids. She heard the door open, the keys tossed onto the ceramic dish by the door. The shift in his breathing. He stood still for a moment longer than usual, then walked into the kitchen without saying a word. She heard a drawer open, then another. The fridge door clicked, stayed open a beat too long, then shut with a muted thud. He came into the living room, and for a moment he just stood there behind her. "Then everything good, Grandma?" She didn't turn, just let out a low breath. "Fine, just tired." He circled into view, hands in his jacket pockets, face too calm. "You rest much while I was gone?" "A bit. Didn't get into too much trouble." She offered a soft laugh. "I barely got off the couch." He smiled, but the corners of his eyes stayed rigid. "Right." He didn't press, not yet, but she saw it in this way his eyes flitted, tracking the living room, the hallway, the stairs. Something had shifted. He could feel it, and she knew he was trying to decide whether or not to accuse her. By morning, his behavior had changed entirely. He was up early, too early. She watched him from the kitchen as he moved with a rhythm that was wrong. Not lazy, not rushed, calculated. He made coffee, walked upstairs, and stayed up there too long. When he came down, his face was carefully blank. He didn't say a word. That afternoon, while she was folding laundry in her room, she heard the sound, the unmistakable click of a screwdriver behind her door. She froze. The sound of metal slipping into wood, 2 more turns, then silence. She walked quietly to the door, tried the knob, locked from the outside. She stood still, hands trembling, not from fear but from rage, so cold it felt sterile. When he finally came back in the evening, he brought soup. "Chicken noodle," he said. "Figured you'd want something easy." She took the bowl without a word. He sat on the edge of her bed, too casual, watching her. "Hey," he said softly, "you feeling okay?" "Bit of a headache," she whispered. "Could be the weather." He nodded. "Yeah, these Vermont storms really sneak up on you." His eyes drifted to the dresser, to the mirror, to the floor. He was measuring. She could feel it. And yet he said nothing about the attic, nothing about the missing files, nothing about the lock code he assumed no one knew. She realized then that he didn't want a confrontation. He wanted control, and fear, silent and complicit, was more useful than rage, so she gave him what he wanted, for now. That night she took the USB from the lining of her bra drawer and placed it into an old prescription bottle. The label had faded years ago. She popped off the cap, nestled the tiny device inside, and stuffed cotton on top to make it look full. She placed it back in the medicine drawer next to her arthritis cream and allergy pills. If he searched, he wouldn't notice. And if he did, he'd have no reason to open it. It was the best hiding place she had. Rebecca returned the next afternoon. She didn't knock this time. She rang the bell twice and waited. Logan opened the door. "Officer," he said with a bright smile. "Back already?" "Routine check-in," Rebecca replied flatly. Eleanor stood behind him in the hallway, expression unreadable. "I'll be quick," Rebecca added, stepping past him. She moved through the house, eyes skimming everything. Her tone was polite but detached, clinical. But Eleanor caught the flicker when Rebecca glanced at her, something sharp and quiet and seeing. They stood alone in the hallway as Logan returned to the kitchen. Rebecca's voice dropped half an octave. "You okay?" Eleanor nodded. "You look different." "I am." Rebecca leaned in slightly. Something happened while he was gone. Eleanor didn't answer, but her eyes spoke. They held something they hadn't before. Purpose. Rebecca took a half step back, studied her. "And then I'll be back in 2 days. Eleanor gave the faintest nod. A new game had begun. After Rebecca left, Logan's energy shifted again. He was quieter, more cautious. That night, Eleanor heard him drilling again outside her room, replacing the screws in the door, rechecking the lock. Then just as she drifted into half-sleep, the sound of the attic door opening, not closing. She lay there listening to the creaks above her hand, resting over her chest where her locket lay. She imagined him up there opening the drawers, discovering the shift, feeling it, realizing he was no longer alone, but still pretending, always pretending. Eleanor waited like she had waited for birth, for death, for bad diagnoses, for families to arrive and say goodbye to loved ones. She knew patience wasn't silence. It was strategy, and now she was using it like a weapon, every movement calculated, every breath controlled. And every word, especially the ones she didn't say, chose their moment like soldiers awaiting the order to strike. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was just waiting for the right time to win. It began with a quiet knock on the back door of the precinct. Officer Rebecca Miles slipped into the small evidence lab at 7:42 a.m., coffee in one hand, Eleanor's unmarked prescription bottle in the other. She handed it off to a tech she trusted, Sergeant Lou Kramer, grizzled and skeptical but sharp when it counted. "What's this?" he grunted. "USB. From a monitored subject," Rebecca said. "She's not under arrest. Yet. I need to see what's on it." Lou raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He inserted the stick into a secure terminal, typed a few commands, and the folders appeared. At first, nothing looked out of the ordinary, just some scanned documents, spreadsheets. Then Rebecca opened one, and everything shifted. Fake prescriptions. Dozens. All bearing Eleanor Briggs's name. Some handwritten, others forged digitally with the letterhead of now-defunct clinics. Rebecca clicked deeper. Bank account logs, large withdrawals, transfers routed through accounts in Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, addresses attached to buildings she recognized, not homes but pharmacies. She pulled up a map and began connecting the dots. Dozens of drop points, names of shell entities, accounts set up using Eleanor's licensed Social Security number, former nurse ID. This wasn't identity theft. This was a full-blown drug distribution network. And Eleanor Briggs, former nurse, grieving grandmother, ankle-monitored suspect, had just handed her the smoking gun. They brought Logan in 2 days later. No sirens, just a quiet knock on the front door of the house. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table when it happened, teacup in hand, robe perfectly pressed. She didn't look up when he passed by the hallway window, escorted by 2 officers. But when the cruiser pulled away, her eyes closed. Just for a second. The first piece had moved. At the station, Logan was calm. He sat across from Rebecca and a federal liaison agent, Mercer, mid-40s, stern, not easily impressed. Logan wore a collared shirt, jeans, and an easy smile. His body language screamed cooperative. "I'm happy to help," he said. "This is all just some massive misunderstanding." Mercer didn't blink. "You've lived with Eleanor Briggs for how long?" 2.5 months. "During that time, were you aware of any accounts in her name being used for medical purchases?" Logan tilted his head. "I managed some of her things, just utilities, food. But I never touched her medical stuff. Why would I?" Rebecca leaned forward. "Did you ever access her laptop or use her ID to set up anything online?" Logan's smile flickered, but he caught it. "I barely know how to use a browser. She's the tech-savvy one." Rebecca tapped the file in front of her. "Then how do you explain this?" She turned the monitor toward him. On screen, a folder titled EB MedOps 2025. Inside, dozens of PDF files containing forged prescriptions, medical licenses, and bank transfers logged with IP addresses originating from the household's Wi-Fi. Logan leaned back, arms crossed. "Look, I can't tell you what she does all day when I'm at work. I assumed she was just reading or whatever. She's old. Lonely. People do weird stuff when they're alone." Mercer cocked his head. "You're saying a 76-year-old widow orchestrated a regional opioid ring from your attic. I'm saying I don't know what she's capable of." Rebecca stared at him and smiled, because there it was, the first fracture. Not in his voice, in his story. They let him go. For now, he returned to the house quiet, distant. Didn't speak much that night. Eleanor watched him from her usual perch in the living room, knitting in her lap, TV on mute. He moved like a man walking through a minefield, eyes alert, steps slow. He didn't look at her. She didn't offer anything, but in the silence she knew. He felt the walls closing in. The next morning she stood in front of her mirror longer than usual. She hadn't worn makeup in years, but she put on a touch of lip color, brushed her hair back, buttoned her cardigan with the gold trim. Her wedding ring sat heavy on her finger, and for the first time in months, she didn't flinch at her reflection. She stared into her own eyes, measured, still, strong, and whispered, "Not a victim." Her voice didn't shake. She walked downstairs and made tea, her spine straight as a ruler. Logan sat at the table, scrolling his phone. When he looked up, she smiled at him. It wasn't fake. It wasn't warm either. It was something else entirely, something that made him look away. Back at the station, Rebecca stood before a dry erase board littered with sticky notes and red string. The case was no longer small. With the federal team now fully involved, the network Logan had used online, prescription mills, identity theft, laundering through nonprofits had unraveled into a map that stretched across state lines. And at the center of it all, one node glowed brighter than the others, the attic. The agents began preparing a warrant, search and seizure. Federal support in place. Rebecca insisted on being there when it happened. "It started with her," she said. "She deserves to see it end." Back at the house, Eleanor walked through the kitchen, humming under her breath. She poured her tea, turned the page of the newspaper, then paused, folded the paper slowly, and waited. She could feel it coming. Not dread, not fear, but something closer to justice. and for the first time in months, she let herself hope that the storm would break, not to wash her away, but to finally clean the house she had once called home. It happened at 6:42 a.m., still dark outside, still cold. The wind scraped the corners of the house, whispering at the windows as if it knew what was coming. Inside, the living room lamp was the only light on. Eleanor sat in her usual chair, dressed and waiting. No tea this morning, no knitting, just silence, and a calmness she hadn't felt in years. From the kitchen, Logan's voice drifted muffled and low. On the phone, always on the phone now, whispering too fast, too clipped. "No, I told you, not here, it's not safe." A pause. "No, she doesn't know anything." Another pause. "Stop panicking, I'll handle it, The front door slammed open. Boots hit the floor. Flashlights swept through shadows. Police federal warrant. Logan froze mid-step, phone still pressed to his ear. Eleanor didn't flinch. Officers stormed into the room, local and federal armed, moving in clean formation. 2 agents tackled Logan against the fridge, wrenching the phone from his hand as it clattered to the floor. "Hands behind your back." "Do it now." "What the hell is this?" Logan barked, struggling. "I haven't done anything." But the cuffs were already on, cold, tight, final. He thrashed once more, then stopped. Because standing just behind the officer's calm, steady eyes burning was Rebecca Miles, and she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Eleanor. The house exploded into motion. Agents fanned out. Upstairs, downstairs, through every room. Drawers were emptied, boxes ripped open, closets pulled apart. The attic door was forced open. A metal crowbar cracked the keypad off the wall. And within minutes the floodlights exposed everything. The workbench, the pill bottles, the passports, the burner phones, the bank records. Plastic bins filled with evidence of months, years of operation. "Clear match with the photos," one officer shouted. She wasn't exaggerating, every bit of it's here. Rebecca stood at the foot of the attic steps, glancing down at Eleanor, who hadn't moved from her chair. Their eyes met, and Eleanor nodded. Logan's shouting grew hoarse as they dragged him through the living room. "You set me up," he spat toward Eleanor. "You think you're smart. You think they're going to believe this wasn't yours, too. You think they'll let some old—" But the agent shoved him forward, cutting off the last word. And Eleanor simply watched him go. Not with triumph, not even hate. Just the quiet weight of someone who had survived something no one believed she could. The next afternoon, the news hit. Local TV stations rolled out breaking coverage. Fraud ring busted, Vermont grandmother's testimony leads to federal drug operation shut down. Eleanor's photo filled the screen. Not the mugshot they'd once used, but a candid taken from outside the courthouse face, lifted toward the sun, eyes clear. Authorities confirmed that the investigation stemmed from testimony and documentation provided by 76-year-old Eleanor Briggs, a retired nurse who had been falsely accused earlier this year of prescription fraud. The real perpetrator, her grandson Logan Whitmore, is being held without bail after a full attic lab was discovered in their shared home in Bennington. Rebecca watched it from her desk, arms crossed. She didn't smile. She just breathed. Because she had known, and now the world knew too. At the same time in the county jail, Logan sat behind glass, eyes sunken, hands bruised. He'd asked for bail. Denied. Flight risk. Risk of tampering with evidence. Too dangerous. The judge had barely needed 10 minutes to reach the decision. Back at home, Eleanor moved through the house like she was relearning how to walk. Every door was unlocked now, every window open. She entered the attic once more, this time not as a thief, but as its rightful witness. The agents had cleared most of it, tagged what they needed, photographed everything. But the space still pulsed with what had happened there. She stood in the middle of it, staring at the empty desk, the stripped-down walls. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single item, Mary's locket. She opened it, ran her thumb over the photo inside, and then quietly she whispered, "We got him." The formal letter arrived 2 days later, typed, signed, all charges expunged, official apology pending. She read it once, then folded it in half and tucked it into Mary's locket. That evening she stood in front of the mirror again. No bruises, no shackles, no cameras watching her sleep. Just her. And in that reflection she saw what had changed. She was no longer surviving. She was free. The official letter came in a white envelope, crisp and heavy. Eleanor opened it slowly at her kitchen table with the same steadiness she'd once used to unwrap surgical gauze. Her fingers didn't tremble, her breath didn't catch. But when she unfolded the letter and read the header, something inside her did shift just slightly. Office of the Governor of Vermont, R.E., Formal Apology and Compensation. It was real, signed by the governor herself. A carefully worded acknowledgement of the state's failure to protect her, to vet their evidence, to question the too easy narrative of the elderly woman turned opioid mule. The letter concluded with a line both sterile and powerful. In restitution for reputational and emotional damages, the state of Vermont formally offers financial compensation in the amount of $210,000 and issues this letter as record of full exoneration. Eleanor laid the paper flat beside her cup of tea. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. Instead, she whispered Mary. And then for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond survival. The press conference was short. Eleanor had declined to speak, but she stood at the edge of the podium, Rebecca at her side. The Vermont Medical Ethics Board took the microphone first, stumbling through a carefully edited statement of apology. They cited procedural lapses and administrative oversights that allowed her license to be exploited. Eleanor stood straight, hands clasped, face impassive. But when the cameras caught her profile, they captured something else too, not bitterness. Resolve. When Rebecca gently nudged her after the event and asked if she wanted to stop for coffee, Eleanor had said, "No, we've got work to do." They started in a dusty community center downtown. The floorboards creaked. The walls were stained with years of forgotten meetings and civic handouts. But the windows were tall, and when the light came in, it touched everything like a promise. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, scanning every corner. Rebecca was beside her, a clipboard in hand. "You're sure about this?" the officer asked. Eleanor nodded. "I was a nurse for 42 years. I know what happens when people don't have access to care or information. It doesn't just hurt them. It destroys families." Rebecca looked at the faded linoleum underfoot. "We'll need permits, grants, a miracle." "We've already had one," Rebecca smiled. "Okay. Let's build something." The name came to Eleanor in the middle of the night. She was sitting in the attic, long since cleared of all traces of Logan. The walls had been repainted. The desk was gone. In its place, a blank canvas. She looked out the small window where moonlight spilled over the hills. Mary used to study in that light. She would read medical journals by flashlight when she was 13. Asked for a stethoscope for her birthday at 15, went into public health instead of surgery because systems are sicker than people, she used to say. Eleanor stood and whispered to the night, "Mary Briggs Health Room," and that was it. That was the name. They held their first planning meeting a week later. Rebecca brought 3 contacts from the nonprofit world. Eleanor brought a manila folder stuffed with floor plans, ideas, and sticky notes scribbled in thick black pen. They drafted the mission statement together. A public sanctuary for education resources and access to basic health services named for a daughter who believed in care before commerce. Rebecca handled the grant applications. Eleanor wrote letters to medical suppliers, to retired nurses, to former colleagues who hadn't spoken to her in years, but now responded with full hearts and open checkbooks. The first donation came from a woman in Oregon. "I remember Mary," the note read. "She held my son's hand through chemo. He survived. I never forgot her face." The second was anonymous, but inside the envelope, $5,000 and one sentence for the woman who turned silence into truth. One morning, Rebecca found Eleanor in the office, seated at an old wooden desk they'd salvaged from the town library. She was writing in longhand, a real letter, not email. Rebecca paused in the doorway. "To who?" Eleanor smiled without looking up. "You." She finished the last sentence, sealed the envelope, and handed it over. Rebecca opened it carefully. Inside the letter read, "Dear Rebecca, you don't know this, but the night I met you, I was ready to disappear. Not just from the world, but from myself. The cameras, the locks, the lies. It all made me smaller, less visible. But you looked at me and didn't see a suspect. You saw someone standing in a fire trying not to scream. I've spent my life believing in the power of clean stitches, well-washed hands, and controlled breathing. But none of those things can heal betrayal. For that you need something harder, louder, braver. You were that. You lit the match when I couldn't. You held the line when I faltered. You brought law to a place ruled by manipulation. You didn't save me. You reminded me I could save myself. This room we're building, it's more than brick and shelves. It's proof that something good can rise from something unforgivable. Thank you for being the light in a house gone dark, for being the spark of justice in a story no one wanted to hear. With gratitude, Eleanor Briggs. Rebecca folded the letter slowly. Jesus, she said softly. I thought you should know, Eleanor said. In case we get famous. We will, Rebecca replied. But not for that, for what we're about to do. And they did. Within 3 months, the room opened. It wasn't grand, it didn't make the news. But on its first day, 12 people walked through the doors. Single mothers retired, factory workers, a teenager with questions about mental health no one had ever answered. They sat, they read, they asked. Eleanor answered. Rebecca watched. And outside, through the wide windows, Vermont carried on cold, lovely Reel, a town that had turned its back and now quietly opened its hands again. Eleanor sat at her desk. A plaque above her read, Mary Briggs Health Room, founded in honor, built in truth. She looked around. No monitors, no locks, no shadows, just light, and finally peace. The first snowfall came the morning of the grand opening. Thick flakes fell slowly from a pale sky, settling on shoulders and scarves like blessings. The town of Bennington, usually too distracted or disillusioned to gather for anything outside of holidays or tragedy, showed up quiet, bundled, and reverent. They came in boots and winter coats, farmers and teachers, young parents with strollers. A group of nursing students from Rutland arrived in a rented van carrying clipboards and curiosity. There were even a few faces Eleanor hadn't seen in years, and some she thought she'd never see again. By 9:00 a.m., the front lawn of the newly renovated Mary Briggs Health Room was full, and at 9:15 Eleanor stepped up onto the small platform built in front of the glass entrance. No mic, no stage lights, just her in a navy wool coat, her gray hair pulled back, her posture tall. Behind her, Rebecca stood near the entrance, hands folded in front of her. The sign above the door gleamed, Knowledge is a form of care. Eleanor looked over the crowd. They were waiting, not for drama, not for spectacle, for her. When I moved into that house on Hollow Pine Lane, she began, I thought I was walking toward the end of my life. My daughter was gone. My husband had passed. And I thought maybe, just maybe, the rest of my days would be quiet, peaceful, small, a beat. But peace can be an illusion, and silence, if you're not careful, becomes a prison. People shifted in place, heads bowed slightly. Eleanor looked toward the hills behind them, dusted with snow. There was a time I believed no one was listening, that the truth had no voice, that the weight of a lie could be heavier than a human soul. She glanced toward the building behind her. But today proves that's not true. Today proves that stories matter, especially the ones we don't want to believe, especially the ones we try to ignore. The air was still. She smiled then gently. I'm not here to talk about revenge. I'm here to remind you that betrayal can be survived, that even the worst kind of darkness can be undone by the smallest kind of light. Eleanor paused, then added, This building stands for that. There was no applause, just something deeper, stillness, recognition, healing. When the doors opened, people walked inside slowly, reverently. Eleanor stood at the entrance, greeting each one, not as a public figure, not as a victim, just as someone who understood what it meant to need hope and find none until one day you do. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. The bookshelves gleamed. Each shelf was labeled in clean handwriting: nutrition, mental health, women's care, addiction recovery, caregiving, grief, first aid, nursing histories, children's health. The attic had been completely transformed. Gone were the bins, the pills, the forged papers. In their place stories, resources, safety, a sacred inversion. Near the window a little girl wandered. She wore a bright pink jacket and mismatched gloves. She was maybe 7 or 8, quiet, alert, her eyes scanning the shelves like they held treasure. She reached for a small book about the human body, colorful with drawings of hearts and lungs and muscles. Eleanor knelt beside her. That's a good one, she said. The girl looked up. I want to be a doctor. Eleanor smiled. You can be. The girl hugged the book to her chest. Some people say it's hard, that it costs too much, that it takes too long. Eleanor leaned in, her voice soft but clear. You can heal the world, sweetheart. Start with a book. Keep going. The girl blinked at her. I can. Eleanor placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You can heal the whole world if you believe it needs healing. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the walls of the attic once used to break her now held shelves that could save others. A room reborn, a life reclaimed. As the last of the visitors filtered out that evening, Eleanor remained at the center of the space, standing alone beneath the ceiling beam that once held a hidden camera. She looked up at the wood now sanded and clean, then turned slowly, letting her eyes trace every shelf, every light. Rebecca entered quietly behind her. "Not bad," she said. Eleanor turned. "Not bad at all." They stood there in silence for a while. "You're not going back to the house, are you?" Rebecca asked. "No," Eleanor said. "I don't think I'll ever step foot in it again." "You keeping the locket?" Eleanor smiled. "Always." Later that night, after locking the doors and turning out the lights, Eleanor returned to her small apartment above the co-op downtown, a place that smelled of lavender and soap, where no locks were changed and no cameras hummed in secret. She took off her coat, poured a small glass of brandy, and sat by the window. The streets were quiet. The town was at peace. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "I once lived in a house that became my prison, but I broke the lock, and in its place I built a door. Now others may walk through it too." She closed the notebook, set it aside, and stared out the window. As the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints of the day, the night whispered softly like a secret meant only for her. Her voice in narration, "I used to be trapped inside my own home, but now I am freer than I've ever been." The camera pulled away, drifting up then out. Through the attic window we see bookshelves glowing under soft light, children's drawings on the wall. A plaque in brass, Mary's name still shining. The frame widens. The building once built on secrets now standing as a monument to truth. Fade to white, silence, and then hope.